It's tricky about being a newsreader, isn't it? And I really should be paid more. But hello, this is Peter Stewart, Get a Better Broadcast, Podcast and Video Voice. You'll notice that over the last few days we've spoken about your correct tone when reading the news. Because if we look at tone through the lens of a newsreader, because it's got so many different facets, this particular diamond, if you like, this particular skill, then you can extrapolate the tonal examples that are more specific and appropriate for you from what I'm talking about, particularly for newsreaders, with the emotional tone, with stories and the development and within stories, within scripts, if you like. Emotional tone in a story can develop over time, not just in the duration of that story while it's on air for that day in that bulletin at that time, but over the course of days or weeks as the story actually develops. So let me explain. A toddler's been mauled by an out-of-control dog and the toddler has died. You would likely read that with appropriate concern. We spoke about universal empathy a few days ago. A week later, something similar happens to another child. Is your concern more than it was previously? It's happened again. We've now had a second loss of life. Does that make it more serious? Or is it less? Because we've kind of been there and done that, but now another story is developing. It's not just necessarily about a dog out of control. Maybe there's a wider picture that we're looking at. How many dogs are out of control? What is the reason behind that? Is it down to licensing, training? Should pet shops and breeders have more of a responsibility? How do we do that? Should there be greater laws and restrictions on dogs who can own them? Muzzling, training, leads? So, is the story more serious or has it moved on? Still serious, of course, but are we developing another tone because the context is another context? And also, consider what may be good news for one listener may be bad news for another. So it's not necessarily an overall universal tone. Now, we spoke about universal empathy earlier on. No one in their right mind would say that the death of a child is a light-hearted story. That's not what I mean at all. You're going to have a universal, serious tone of empathy with that kind of story. But some stories may be good for one, but bad for another person, in all genuine emotional feeling. Let me explain. Okay, let me explain. Here we go. An interest rate rise. Is that good or bad? Well, it's good for savers, but bad for borrowers. Jobs, as a new factory is built. Is that good or bad? Well, it may be good for job seekers, but maybe bad for those protecting the greenfield sites where that new factory is going to be built. Another day of the heatwave. That's good news, isn't it? Yeah, for sun worshippers. Potentially it's bad news for farmers, and so on. So what I'm saying is, you need to consider your tone in the context of who's listening and what they may be thinking about the story that you're explaining. We continue the thoughts about tone tomorrow as Get a Better Broadcast, Podcast and Video Voice continues. From London, I'm Peter Stewart.